Okay, this video is going to be about making fuel tanks. And in the fuel tank, I've incorporated a check ball and a small filter. This small filter is from the RC aircraft filters. I just buy the whole filter and I have to take this out. I wish I could find out where to buy just this piece, but it's not available anywhere that I know. So it costs about $6 to get that. But it's well worth the trouble, because when you run these engines, if one little piece of lint gets up in the fuel and gets into the needle valve, it's going to stop the engine or make it run lousy. Then you have to take it out and blow it out. I filter my fuel real good, but I still use this tiny filter to make sure that I don't get any, and it'll run for hours if it's done right. Okay, I'll show you how to make the tank. This is out of brass tubing, which you can get at your local hardware store. And I've got it down to as few parts as I possibly can. This is the top for the filter. There's an O-ring goes in there. It must have fallen out. And this is the gas cap. And this is the pickup tube. And the check ball, it goes in the bottom. It all goes together like this. And you can take it all apart and clean it if you want to. We'll just run you through every part and show how it's done. The legs are 1" 425, and I'm going to cut those off and we'll show you how to make those. What I'm going to do is just square the two ends and make these exactly the same length. Okay. I'm just taking a light cut on both ends to make sure they're smooth and exactly the same length. I'm just squaring up the backs here. Just use a parallel to get them square. So the next thing I'm going to do is put a little bluing on here and mark it off to make the indents. The indents can be any width. You just have to leave enough room over here for the magnets. So I try to just sort of make it 3/8 by 3/8. I'm just going to mark this at approximately 3/8 of an inch up. So I have a line to go by. This isn't important. It's just, it's got to be aesthetically good. So they look the same. So now I'm just going to cut the relief, and I've got just a rounded tool in here so the edges will be rounded. I'm going to go about 100 thousandths deep. What I'm going to do is mark for the magnet holes. Now that's 3/8 material, so I want to go 3/16 from the edge. 1/87 is 3/16. Mark it there. Flip it over. Mark them there. And go this way. Now I'm just gonna prick punch those and put the holes in for the magnets. I'm just gonna put these in there flush with the top of the vise, and the way I usually do that when it's not important is just put them down like that, put the vise on top of them, and tighten it up. And they come out reasonably flush with the top. It's 3/16 inch, so I'm going to drill an 1/8 inch hole a little over depth first, and then I'll open it up. (11/64) is just one drill under, and then I got to go 200 thousandths on. Setting my depth to 200. Now these magnets are a tiny bit oversized, so I think they will press right in there perfectly. Okay, just for aesthetics, I'm going to use the same cutter that I didn't use on the bottom, and I'll put a little radius on these sides. A little cove cut, I should say. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is cut the radius of that pipe right in here with a fly cutter. And so I have to put this in the vise square. So the way I do that is take a parallel, put it in there against the back, and try to hold all that together at once. And tighten it up. I got to make sure I got clearance for the curve. Okay, that's flat down and it's against the parallel, so it should be square and straight. Tighten it up really good. And put in the fly cutter and okay. So I'm going to center this. I'm going to center this before I put the fly cutter in. Right there. So this is the pipe that I use to make the tanks with. This is what they call unplated, I guess it's bathroom and kitchen traps and so forth. But you can sometimes get a tailstock which doesn't have the curve on it. It's a little cheaper. But when I went to the hardware store, he had none of the tailstocks that were unplated. They were all chrome. To find this unplated is getting harder and harder. But this makes beautiful gas tanks. So it's exactly, it's supposed to be 1.5 OD. It's slightly oblong, but that's what it is, 1.5. So I got to set the fly cutter at 3/4 inch. Fly cutter at 3/4. Now this is a little jig I made up to set my fly cutters with. It's exactly 2 inches from here to the center of that hole. So knowing that, I can put my fly cutter in here, and I want a 3/4 inch, so I'm going to set this at 1 1/4, and I can put that on there and adjust my tool to this and come out with pretty close measurement on my cutter. So as you notice, I've put magnets on this side of the jig to hold my square, so I don't have to hold that, and I can just push my tool up to it and lock it, and it should be the dimension. So there it is, set pretty close, and as you see, I can slide this up and down in the stage where I put it when I have to set it. And this also has a 3/8 hole in this end, and it's exactly 2 inches from that side, so you can do a 3/8 the same way you did the 1/2 inch one. I can just use from the other end. I'm going to take a couple of test cuts on this and then check it with the tubing, make sure it fits right. So there's the fit. It looks just about perfect. I couldn't adjust anything. So now we'll put the other one in there and cut it out. There they are. It should fit perfect. It is my piece. What I'm going to do is, you can see the ends are rolled in a little bit. I'm just going to put that in the lathe and roll that out. I'm doing is just doing where the legs go on, and then I'll just have to rebuff it a little bit afterwards. But I'm not going around the whole thing yet. Okay, we got this good and clean. We're going to solder the legs onto it. So I made up this little aluminum jig for gas tanks only, because most of my gas tanks are the same size. And what happens is I can put it over here and it aligns those and holds them flat while I solder them. So I've got flux on there already. I just center that and clamp it down. With the jig, and that gets them almost perfectly flat and square, hopefully, and the same distance from both ends. They can't twist. Looks right. So now I'll just heat it up and solder it. I'm going to heat this from the inside mostly. A little bit on those pieces. This should a lot of brass there. Okay. Now we'll get the other side. I guess I can do it here. Yep, it's already hot. Okay. That should do it. Okay, here's the test. We'll take the jig off, get the water off of it, and see if it sits flat on the surface plate. Yep, no wobble at all. So if you make a simple jig to hold those legs, and I make it out of aluminum so the solder won't stick to it, don't make it out of brass or something, and it just goes on there, it holds the legs straight, it just fits on there, just fits in there. It makes it a real easy job. So to make the end caps, I just have a piece of 1.5 inch brass with the exact same diameter as the tubing. I put that in the lathe. And I like recessed ends, so I'm going to do the recess first here. And then I'm going to cut in 25 thousandths so that it'll slide in there, and then I'll part it off and I'll have my end cap. Now the indent, it doesn't matter how much you do it or if you do it at all. It just makes it look nice, so I just do a little for detail. I don't have any dimensions on it. Now I'm going to clean that up with sandpaper so that I get the tool marks out of it. That looks pretty good there. That'll buff out real nice. I'm going to take the parting tool. So I'm going to make that probably about a 1/16 thick. I'll go in there, 62. And then I'm going to make the lip, 62. Actually, I'm going to go in 26 just to make sure I get enough. 1,000th won't show. And then I'm going to move over a little bit. And what I'm going to do is go a little deeper. And then I'm going to take that to the cutoff saw. Now I'm going to mark it for the holes. And the first thing you have to do is get the center line here. So I'm going to hold that flat against the legs. put this at the top, and it measures 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go down 3/4 of an inch, which is 3/750. Whoop, and lock it there. And mark this. So that's the center line. Then we're going to put it this way, and I usually put them about 1/2 inch out, or a little less, because the cap ends up an 1/8, so it ends up about 5/8 in on both ends. And that's going to be where the pickup goes and the fill. Okay, so now I got to prick punch it, and what I usually do with the round object is I put a round piece of stock in the vise here so I can hold it and make a prick punch. I'm going to start off with a spotting drill here and then go to a sheet metal drill. So I got the sheet metal in there, the sheet metal drill. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in 5 segments, which is 7/16. I'm just going to deburr those. I just take that burr off of there. I'll have to do the same on the inside with a flat file. Put a little flux on that. Make sure it's well fluxed. Do this end first. Just put a little on here. Okay. I'm putting this up on a little pedestal so I can get the heat underneath it. Now, if I get that too hot, what's going to happen is this is going to fall off. So I've got to secure that on there some way. I spring clip on here to make sure that leg doesn't fall off of there. Now what I'm going to do is cut up some pieces of solder and drop inside. Just going to drop those in there. Then I'll just take a stick and slide them up to the side. Sort of equally space them in there so that it'll run all the way around, hopefully. Okay, and now I'll just heat it up. And that's it.
Flex it up.
Now, I got to put the solder inside here. And the first one, I want to get up in there. I'm going to push the other ones in place with a stick. I'm just going to center this by eye because it's not that important and I can do pretty good that way. See, now I'll put the radius on both ends because I got to make 2 of these exactly alike. chuck it up here. I gotta do a center drill and then a hole for a 5/16 thread. So now I've got the center drill, and I'm going to drill a hole for a 5/16 24 thread, which turns out to be a J drill. But if you don't have a J drill, I think you can use something else. It's like a 15/64 or something like that. But, use your drill chart. Just go in deep enough so you can part it off. That's my cut off tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here 25 thousandths. I mean actually 50 thousandths, because I want that 100 thousandths smaller than the original size, which is 1/2 inch. There's the part. I'm going to solder this on here, and I made a big mistake at the beginning. That should have been a 9/32 hole, and I used this to center it. This piece will go through there, and it would go through the hole and keep it centered while you soldered it on there. For some reason I got thinking about something else, so I'll just have to solder this on there without the jig. Get my torch here. Now we're going to tap this, and I'm using the drill press instead of my little tapping head because it's easier to film over here. I've clamped the device down, got that centered and square and straight, and we're just going to tap right through it. So now I'll show you how to make the caps. And I make these all the same so that any cap will fit any fuel tank, and try to stick with it. So we'll just show you how to make this cap. So now I got a knurling tool in there. I'm going to knurl the outside edge of the cap. Slow this down a little bit. So now I've got the knurl on there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 5/16 hole in there, just deep enough so I can solder the threaded part into it. So I'm going to start off with a 19/64 drill, which is just 1 under 5/16. I'm going to go in there a good 100 thousandths. Just so I can solder the threaded part in. Now I'm going to just make that look like a gas cap with this parting tool. First I'm going to put a little lip on the bottom. What I'm going to do is step this in and going to file that round. The thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this 5/16 24 thread, and what I've done is I've threaded quite a bit of this so that when I need a gas tank cap I can make it out of this. And I just did that in the lathe with a die and just make a long piece of threaded brass. Okay, I'm going to saw that off to length, put it in there and solder it. It's got to be about this long. I've got a 100 thousandths pocket in that cap, so I'm going to go 400, so it'll give it 300 thousandths sticking out. 1, 2, 3, 4, and part this off. Yeah, I moved it down to 350. That 400 just looked like too long. Before I go all the way through that, I'm just going to clean this end up so it'll fit in good. Now I'm just going to solder that piece of threaded rod in here. Should fit in there real nice. That would hurt. Yes. Now, I'm not going to solder around the edge. What I'm going to do is put some solder inside and let it come up, because if I try to solder here, I'll fill up some of the thread. I'll put a little flux on this too. Put that in there and heat it up. The next thing I'm going to do is round the top off. Okay, what I do is I have this little jig that I've made up. It has both 5/16 threads in it. I can put that in there, put that in my vise, and just take a file and dome that up. Here's the finished gas cap. All I have to do is put a vent hole in it. Okay, the next thing we're going to show you is doing the pickup tube. What I've done is both of these fittings that go on the tank are the same thread, so I can switch it around if I had to. So I'm just going to solder that other fitting onto here, and I'm going to show you how I did that. I kind of goofed up in the very beginning. I drilled that hole too big, so I couldn't use my aluminum fixture to hold it in center. So I'll show you what I do when I don't have a centering device. I use my tapping head. I have a long shaft here now that just fits in this hole and holds it in place, and I can put this underneath it and drop it right down on there. Now that's not going to move. I get into position and solder it. Okay, so that should be centered. And now I can solder it. Okay, I think that got all the way around. Okay, remember I told you about the model airplane filters. This is the filter here, is the way you get it. I think it costs around $6. And inside there is this nice little filter. But you have to be careful. There's somebody that sells these cheaper, and what they have is a piece of screening, and they don't have a filter, and they're useless. You want this one with a little filter in it, and that'll fit inside my tube here. And that's the 5/16 threaded rod. And I'll see what the size of the hole is. It's a 9/32 hole, and that goes right in there. And when you make your top part, you put an O-ring in here, and you screw that in, and there's already an O-ring on the bottom of it, so it seals it up tight. That way you can get at the ball, which goes in here like this. And if you can see the bottom of the tube, there's a little plug in there with a hole through it, and the ball fits in it, and I'll show you how to make that. And that's all there is to it. We'll start off with the tube. The dip tube, I'm going to start off with that. I usually just stick it in the tank and try to figure out about how long it should be. And I make it extra long at first. So there's the dip tube. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a short piece of this 7/32 brass that just fits up in there in the lathe, and I'm going to bore the hole through there a little smaller than the check ball. Okay, now I'm going to spot drill this. So first I'm going to put a 1/8 pilot hole in there, and then open it up to the right size. Okay, I'm opening that up to a 9/64 now with a brass drill. Just checking the fit of the ball. It doesn't go in there. It's got good clearance around the edges. You have to leave enough clearance, of course, for the fuel in the tube. But this is the tube I'm using. There's plenty of room around that ball for the fuel to go. It only takes a tiny bit of fuel to run these engines. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put this ball in here, and I'm going to hit it with the hammer very lightly, just to sort of drive it in the hole a little bit, and hopefully it'll make a good seal. That's all I'm going to do. And you can actually do this more by running a punch in there later, but now I'm going to solder it in the tube, this part in the tube. So I'm going to flux this the minimum amount of flux, and then I'm going to push the little tube in there. Make sure I put the staked end in first. That's the end that I hit with a hammer, and I'm not putting that all the way in. I'm just leaving it out so I can touch the solder to the outside, because I don't want that solder to run on the part that I staked.
Okay.
You see when I heated it, it sucked it right in the tube, but I still soldered it by just touching the solder here. Drop the ball in there and blow on it. It seems to be nice and tight. My video man told me that I should explain why we have to have the ball, and it's a good idea. A lot of people will put the fuel tank above their fuel mixer, and that's a mistake. Because if the engine shuts off and you're not watching it, the fuel continues to run into the mixer and runs all over the table. So you want this a little bit below the fuel mixer, or the carburetor, as some people call it. But I usually put it, 1 or 2 inches at least below the fuel mixer. Let me show you here. Now this is one that has been made before. And as you can see, you've got probably, what, 3 inches here? And it'll lift that fuel, no problem. The problem is if you don't have a check ball, when the engine is coasting, it will trim back and you get an air bubble in here. And then when it goes to fire, it can't suck fuel because there's an air bubble. It has to suck the air bubble first. So the check ball keeps the fuel from running back in the line. And I have tested this, and I've actually put the fuel down here before the engine will start to run rough. It'll be 6 inches below this. So it sucks it up 3 inches with no problem. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide this on there just a little bit, screw it in the tank, and the tube is going to hit the bottom of the tank. And screw it all the way in. And now it's moving the tube up, so I'm just going to back it up a little bit. And that's a good position for it. So I just unscrew it easily. It should stay in position. And I'm going to solder it right there. So you have to be careful not to get solder on the threads, but that's pretty hot. I just cool it off a little bit here. But you can see it's soldered nicely around there. Next thing I'm going to make is just this little nut to screw in the tube with. And then on top of that will be the pickup. And I'll show you that. Make this first and solder it onto there. So what I'm going to do is put a little knurl on here to make it easy to get off. There's the knurl. So I'm going to open that up and thread it. I'm going to run that in as far as I can and then put in the bottoming tap. And even if it isn't finished completely, I can finish threading it. I think it's going to be plenty of thread. I can finish threading it after I part it off. Now, the thickness of this nut really doesn't mean anything. So it can be any thickness. What I'm going to do is try to do 2 here. Now this has to be fairly smooth because the O-ring on the filter butts up against this on the top. So one side has to be pretty smooth. So I'm just running the tap through here again because of the burr that it left on there when I parted it off. And there it is. Now I just have to figure out how deep to put it on there, and then I'm going to solder it in place. The way I determine that is to screw it in the tank until it hits the bottom. Right there. And now I'm going to put this nut on here. There it is. Now I'm going to back the thing out just a hair and tighten the nut down. And that's where the nut belongs. So I'm going to take this off now without moving the nut, hopefully.
Wow.
A little more thread than I need there, but There it is, and that's where it's going to go. So put a little flux on it and solder it on there. I got to get that in the exact same position. There, 1 5/8, and solder that in position. So now I'm going to make the pickup. I just have to get enough thread in here so I can screw it onto the pickup tube. Doesn't take much because there's a filter in there and a O-ring, so it only goes in a couple of threads. I'm just going to go in a little deeper with a small drill, and when I go into the side here, I'll be sure and hit that pocket because it's only going to be about this high. I just want to get in a little deeper. I only went in about 50 thousandths there. And now I can take and part this off and shape it. Let's see how deep in we are. That's how far in we are. In here, I'm just gauging that. Put it there, and I want to cut it a little bit longer than that so I don't get into the drill hole. Okay, I'm just going to screw this onto a little stub jig so that I can machine it, finish machining it. I'm going to take off the knurl. That doesn't show. So the next thing I have to do is drill a hole into the drill pocket that I left above the thread and put a 1/8 inch tube in there for the fuel line pickup. So I'm just going to spot drill that by eye. And then okay, now I'm just going to solder that tube in there and we'll be done. We can put it together. Get a little flux on here so I can do it. My solder. To assemble this, I'm just going to screw this in here. Now this doesn't have to be airtight. To the tank because the tank is vented. Okay. The next thing I want to do is put in the little filter, and this of course has to be smooth at the top. I need a 5/16. I hope I got one here. Oh, there it is. There it is. And this is what has to be airtight here. So you've got an O-ring in here, and that's airtight. And then it'll draw it through the filter and out the tube. And it also gives you a little swivel so you can turn this around a little bit. So you can do that two ways. You can unscrew from the tank a little bit and you can put this in any direction, or you can just crimp down the O-ring a little more and move it. And there it is. I forgot to put the ball in though, so I'm going to take this off. And you drop the little ball in. Put this in here. Tight. Then there's no leakage. I can test it for leakage just by blowing in it. I can draw fuel up, but I can't blow into it. So there's the finished tank. I took these off because the next thing I'm going to have to do is polish this tank all up, and then I'll insert the magnets. And once I insert the magnets, it'll look like that. And you'll notice that these are exactly the same size, and I use the same jig to put the magnets in with, so that this tank will fit any engine that I've built. And all the engines are the same. So there it is, all polished up and finished. And as you can see, it'll fit right on this engine, because the magnet pattern is the same in all of them. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. And if you liked what you saw, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.